Hey, this is Sabrina, Monarch of Monarch Astrology and Magic of the Spheres podcast, and I'm going to be talking to you in this video about the new moon in Virgo that's happening on September 2nd. So what I'm noting about it specifically, and let me pull up the chart, is that we have this new moon in 11 degrees of Virgo. It's going to be at 9:55 p.m. Eastern time, and I'm really noticing that it is applying toward an opposition to Saturn and Pisces. There's also this square to Jupiter and Gemini, which I'll talk a little bit about. But in this forecasting, I'm going to be focusing a lot on that Saturnian mood in relationship to this Virgo new moon. So generally, when we see a Virgo new moon, you want to look at the part of your chart that it's activating. The house topic is where you'll have these themes. But Virgo is a lot about health. It is about the spirituality on the earth plane, right? Like herbalism and the magic of plants, right? Or the altar that you make for a ritual, and the way that the physical organization of items has a spiritual effect. Virgo is also about alignment, right? Like getting into alignment with our path, with our soul, with our spirit. It is about taking steps in a practical direction and, health really in all sense of the word. It could be our physical health, our mental health, and also our spiritual health, that sense of alignment between our actions and the way that we're showing up and participating in life, how that aligns with a deeper spiritual framework. So I'm going to be talking to you really about this way that the new moon is opposite Saturn in Pisces and just kind of taking that angle really particularly. So what came to mind was the Eden Project by James Hollis. And the author, James Hollis, writes of the search in this book for the magical other, the romantic obsession, the opiate of our times, that quest to find the beloved that for many is larger than religion or knowing God. And if someone is already in a relationship, it's also the way that one looks to the other to be a source of fulfillment in a way that is really similar to how one might approach God, right? But in this very unconscious way. He's speaking in the book of the addiction that is love, a socially normal, celebrated obsession. Of course, not that love isn't centrally important and part of, the point of why we exist, but often that we think of what we think of love as a distortion of it. So I'm going to start out with love or romantic love as a thing, but also as a metaphor, because you can also swap out romantic love for what I would call ideal or perfect circumstances, right? If you think about what it is that you think makes life worth living, right? That you aspire toward, that you dream, that you wish for, and the internal search, yearning, or hunger for those ideal and perfect circumstances. But let's come back to romance. Whether this takes an obvious Disney form for any given individual or not, love addiction also comprises of the patterns that more or less take us out in intimate relationship. It's these projections that we place on other people that has us deeply in our unconscious, not sober in reality. It's the places that we really get taken out by our own unconscious, and we make what is ours about the other, or again, swap it out, what is ours about the acquisition of perfect circumstances. The thing that I found really compelling about this book, The Eden Project, is that that there's this common advice or platitude really about, love yourself first so that you can be loved. And this is in a lot of ways a misguided spiritual sentiment. There is some truth in it, but it ignores the reality that we are interdependent beings, that we come into this life utterly dependent, and that we form these first relationships with our caretakers or parents, and that our psyche forms around that. And, without that relationship, we wouldn't exist. So independence, autonomy, exists to an extent, but also in the bigger scheme of things, it's not. So the book addresses the issue of loving oneself first in a wholly other way that really actually hit me. And it's from the perspective that we enter this life as souls already with a core innate essence, which of course is connected to how I practice astrology as well, with evolutionary astrology, that, we don't come into this life blank slates that are, conditioned. Like, we have a nature, we have an essence. And Hollis explains that by simply coming into a family and a culture, we make a series of compromises and adaptations to survive, to belong, and we lose parts of ourselves in that process, right? How you get along in your family dynamic, where you become, you cope with an unstable family by being the rescuer, by being the caretaker, and you leave behind parts of you in order to do that, like the part of you that receives care, or maybe the part of you that's like a rebel, or, something like that. Or maybe you cope with your family dynamic by being a fighter, by being a rebel, etc. It's like whatever path you take, it's not really an expression of the whole of you. It is a response or an adaptation to your environment. So then we lose these parts of ourselves. They go into shadow. And in this kind of search to come back home to the whole, complete self, we see these parts of our self that we, have long been cut off from, that happened at a very pre-verbal, unconscious time and place. We see it in the glimmer, the sparkle of a person who captivates us for some deep reason. We project these hidden, lost parts of ourselves onto the other. And without consciousness that we are doing that projection, we really see these circumstances or these people as the gateway to Eden, the gateway to this lost thing. He talks in the book about how, this is part of why in breakups or something that people can become suicidal, because there's such a attachment to, all of life, to God, to everything, to this particular circumstance that holds that magical key. So, I mean, I think it's generally pretty relatable, whether or not people avoid relationship for this reason, or people have a string of dramatic romances, that intimate romantic love brings out quite a side of people. It is quite revealing, right? And it's a place where we really experience that tug from our unconscious of that yearning to return to this kind of perfect Edenic state. And as long, however, as we view people through this lens unconsciously, right, that we're projecting onto them something that they are, that is going to give us back a part of ourselves, when we're doing that, we engage romance in a more or less narcissistic frame, right? Just trying to come back to a self through the other. And that's where we get, if you have been on either side of manipulative patterns to try to make a person be a certain way to fulfill your needs, that's part of it. We view people in terms of what they can do for us, who they are to us, instead of being able to see them as individuals. Again, also swap out perfect and magical circumstances. It's an attitude toward life that it needs to serve me and my particular hungers, my particular dreams, right? As opposed to relating or being in service or being in the great dynamic flow of things. It's looking at things from a younger, more narcissistic angle. And we unconsciously assign other people the burden of our own individuation and spiritual journey. We expect them to carry what we are actually meant to. And implied by all of this, I think, is the idea that our innate essence is Edenic, right? If we're just trying to come back to lost parts of ourselves, to come back to that womb, like connected to the cosmos, like everything is one energy, that we are, if we go far enough back in time, as a soul from when we departed or separated from source to become this individual essence, we remember that sense of wholeness. We remember, that part of us that is God also. And then so much of our search and longing in this life is to return to that feeling of oneness, to something that we already are, but have forgotten or lost however deeply we have. But I mean, maybe just sit with that for a moment of the innateness of things being Edenic. Because it's different directionally than going out and searching, right? Versus remembering inwardly. And I am connecting this back to the transit, I promise, starting here. But I suspect that the project to live out or realize a fantasy, different than living a dream, right? Dreams, fantasy have a little bit of a different connotation. But fantasy is an illusion, right? So this effort to try to make a fantasy be real, I don't think it's highly supported with Saturn and Pisces. I think that the purpose of the transit actually is disillusionment and anchoring in a deeper spiritual reality. The transit might be guiding us toward more hard-hitting experiences of disillusionment. Maybe you've encountered this already, so that we can take actual responsibility to individuate and to separate our fantasy projections from reality and reclaim those projections consciously, right? So that which you expect from the magical other, or that which you expect from the perfect and ideal circumstances. The amount of essence, the amount of individuation, the amount of authority and autonomy in your essence that you project onto when this happens, when I have this, when my partner changes, when my partner fixes this problem, when my life looks different, like all of these different ways that we project it outward. So the new moon in Virgo is applying toward an opposition to Saturn and Pisces. What stands out for me is the possibility that this new moon might be recuperative, or about health, wellness, mental or spiritual health, all Virgo themes, in relationship to any disillusionments that we've been experiencing with Saturn and Pisces. Not just about, quote, the magical other, but also about ideal and perfect circumstances. I think, maybe those who have been inclined to act the most on their dreams or to go for them, it's a mixed experience where sometimes you're on the path and you realize the things that you've been seeking. But sometimes when we're really in illusion, we think that something means, like, we place all this meaning onto something that's not actually inside of the thing itself. It's our projection of meaning onto the thing. And so we reach the pinnacle of our perceived success, or we manifest the dream partner or what have you. And we realize it doesn't fulfill a deeper hunger, right? Or we don't even get that point of manifestation and we're just hungering endlessly for something we haven't gotten. So whether there's a gift of disillusionment in that way, because it shatters the whole dynamic instead of just being in this purgatory space of never getting there. But I think also sometimes for people who have been applying themselves towards some kind of illusion, and it's like years go by and they haven't made it in the way that they've been trying to make it, there is a grief process, and maybe being like, it's time to stop expecting life to yield this particular harvest that promises this symbolic meaning of happiness. Maybe there's something else here, which is a really hard thing to sit with. And you can imagine actually that people, rather than sitting with that, choose addictions or drugs or alcohol or whatever other avoidance or escapism tactics, because it's uncomfortable really to sit with the idea that something we've placed a lot of symbolic value on is actually more vapid, right? And that it kind of opens up this hole of like, well, what then? Right? And I think that is a deeper spiritual inquiry of like, if you don't expect life to feed your ego, feed your idea of what you think this life is supposed to be, then yes, like what is the path at that point? It's a different conversation with life. And as someone who has had a large fantasy life and someone who has had a lot of yearning and desire for things beyond my present reality, for a lot of my life, I understand this whole like, trying to milk life for something, trying to make it something else. And it's weird to look back at that too, because there were also so many times, even like my writing life developed from that, of being kind of bored in some kind of deep existential way and developing poetics to just enhance my perception, to find entertainment in my reality. And now I have this gift of writing that comes from that. So it's a little bit, it's like, well, I don't know, weird to sit with. If you really think about the ways that you are trying to, like, the best way that I can phrase it is like milk life. Like you have a circumstance, but you're trying to enhance it to your own kind of egoic preferences, as opposed to meeting what is, which feels, depending on what is, more boring or mundane or maybe sensational in a really uncomfortable way. But anyways, lately I've been engaged in a living meditation that has been very life-changing for me, and it's simple, and I hope it makes sense, because it's almost so simple that it might not hit. But the meditation is about meeting what is, not trying to pull or get anything from the moment that is any different than what is. And so inside of that, there's like a deepening, there's a sensuality of it, and there's also a lot of spaces for subtle disappointment of like, this is it, this is all there is, right? And then that's a layer, and then something else opens up, and then life becomes a flow of experiences that are what they are. And inside of that, actually, I wish I remember where I heard this. Maybe it was James Hollis in the Eden Project. But it was the idea that, I think it was him, that happiness is not a state that you attain forever. It's an ephemeral and fleeting circumstance. So the search for perpetual happiness is kind of an addiction or hungry ghost. Happiness and joy, like these are things that you can cultivate for sure. But the expectation that you will arrive at a permanent state of it is not actually how life works. And so having the capacity to meet what is moment to moment, to be with the mundane, to be with the disappointment, to be with the cringe or the painful or the grief and the joy and all of that, it's like it creates a more grounded intimacy with life, as opposed to a constant dopamine addiction chasing. I want the next thing. I want the next high. I want life to serve me and my appetites all the time. And so engaging in this practice, I realized how much of my energy is oriented towards striving, which again has served me in my life. I've had many ambitions and I've accomplished things because of that. And there's a mix of, sometimes striving can be very forceful. Other times it's a natural creative emergence that can come from a grounded place also. But I realized where my energy is oriented towards striving, or where I hover outside of my experience, like waiting to land. Like if I can manifest some set of circumstances, then I will choose to arrive and be here. This has been my conditioning, I suppose, And I think there's something, Saturn and Pisces can be a little bit melancholic. I had an experience, I am taking a break from dating as suggested by a teacher. And part of the meditation, in this book was also part of it, was to not be trying to get this kind of thing from life or to feed this particular appetite, but to work with the energy that is like emerging and opening in my spiritual embodiment path, and let it nourish my own deepening. And I was at the beach And I would get really grabbed in my attention by any beautiful couple or beautiful, happy looking couple that I saw. And I just felt this tug of like, there's so much of me that hinges on particular dreams I have where it's like, this has to happen, or I don't know what the point of living even is. Um, and finally, like I sat with that and it just was more neutral of like, that's almost like I could just see it. There's definitely been times I've been much more grabbed by it of like, it's unbearable. Like I have to contort my life and figure out how to figure out how to strive, figure out how to make things happen because I cannot deal with life not providing the harvest that I think it needs to. And to just really sit with the radical depth of grief of what if nothing that I want happens? Like, what if it's not in the cards for me, etc. And to stop, like, to just really have that ego death, basically, which I think, it's a felt sense, but the theory, if you will, also is just that what happens when you stop trying to grab and attach onto perfection in life? Like if you just open to the current of truth, essentially. So the more I meditatively descend into what is, the more I face everything I reject. A moment is boring, right? Or not what I thought it would be in a grand sense. All the places life isn't what I want it to be. And then I realize inside of that intimacy or connection, right? Not rejecting, not trying to change, not trying to get some hit elsewhere, just being with what is, that this material is effectively all I have to work with, this present moment. So why not be here? What I found also was that just descending, being with, that life would have these waves of moments that have different qualities to them, including these sublime peak experiences, 10 of cups, happiness, ecstasy moments, and thinking like, wow, these just arise. I can't just spend my life like fishing for them. You can cultivate a space to create like different types of wealth, right? Spiritual, emotional, financial, etc. wealth. You can create the space or facilitate that. But then there is just the moment and what's arising and coming and falling into being and all of that. I hope this is making sense. But for me, this all applied back to the idea of the search for the magical other, this constant searching for something outside of myself to be a magical supply. A deeper level of presence and attunement with my own inner life, exactly what is arising, is a perpetual gateway into connection and intimacy. Then this deeper relationship with self translates to deeper intimacy or intimacy capacity with other. And I think there's a lot of confusion in the way, on the way there, to realize that self-editing or self-control or self-optimization, which can be very Virgo things, this, I've been thinking of the Radiohead Creep lyrics, I want a perfect body, I want a perfect soul, feels very Virgo new moon opposite Saturn and Pisces. But that these kind of self control projects aren't the same as self-intimacy. Right? Or that you will put yourself in a matrix of how you can receive love, the ways you can earn it, as opposed to being with what is that's not necessarily ideal, and how these can be places when things are not ideal or they're not in the zone of preference, that we simply cut off connection. We might reject those parts of ourselves. We might put those parts of ourselves like in the closet somewhere. And so we just create these spaces where we literally cannot relate to ourselves. Or we relate to that part of ourselves, but with punishment or cruelty or whatnot. And that creates a certain reality matrix around us, as opposed to getting into those like nitty gritty Virgo spots of, how can I be with this material in a more tender, life-giving, healthy, if you will, with Virgo way. Then the new moon also squares Jupiter and Gemini, which I think could relate to a part of us that may still be sidetracked by horizontal expansion, kind of collecting random experiences or whatnot, and the possible superficiality within that. So Jupiter and Gemini has some good, like a lot of good to it also, but I think that there may be, if we're thinking about Virgo and this like dynamic that I've been talking about and setting up with the search for the transcendent in the mundane, you can go inward. You can connect more deeply and root in and connect to God and source and whatnot. Or you can be kind of horizontally searching for it. Writing this also reminded me, I didn't include this in the write-up, so I'll just kind of go off on a tangent, but writing this reminded me of a time in my life that was really connected to my individuation, where I had just had this huge spiritual awakening, the one I talk about now and again on my channel when I was 21, that really disrupted my life, where I got kind of caught in the psychiatric web, did not believe in the diagnosis they gave me, had to fake my way out, and then just was, came out of that fresh and had these this new clairvoyance, these new psychic abilities, this new system of astrology, and I started to build my life back up. And I was really, journaling a lot. I was in connection very deeply with myself. I was talking to God all day, every day. And I was really craving connection with humans. And I was in this space where it was a time, just kind of going out for walks, praying to make a friend or something like that, and meeting some stranger and having dinner with them. I was definitely having like Uranus transits, I think, too. And having like a really pleasant time, and then being usually like, well, I guess it's time to go back to my own company because I just had a pleasant time, but this thing that I'm really searching for, I'm not finding here. And I wasn't in despair about it. I had this faith at that time that it was all going to come together. So I wasn't, but it was just interesting to be searching and yearning for something and to kind of go out and sample what was available, who I can talk to, and just be like, it's not very Virgo. It's like, it's not it. I'm going to go home and be alone now. And I think that the Jupiter and Gemini square to the new moon in Virgo, I wonder if there's an element to it of, Virgo's trying to fix something or like wants a process or wants to refine something. And this idea of like getting lost in like sampling the options as opposed to rooting down and deeper. And just how there's so much space in our current, like the way that life is set up for distraction. We have our phones, we have social media. There's a lot of things that can grab our attention very quickly. And there isn't necessarily as much, unless you really tune that out and live rural or whatnot. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of things grabbing for our attention a lot of the time. And I think that can be fun and delightful and like entertaining, but at certain moments of deep spiritual opening or individuation, sometimes we do need a little bit more silence, discernment, and deepening. A greater question emerging during this lunar cycle is, are we busying ourselves or are we present? Either way, Virgo has a lot to do, a lot to attend to, but busying contains an energetic of avoidance and eventually creates crisis, such as when we find ways to distract ourselves from the root of an issue and get absorbed in the Band-Aid solutions that temporarily soothe us and make us feel better, but we never address the deeper thing. We avoid the deeper thing, which then only gets worse and more explosive. And we have to maintain the busyness of that avoidance until it all comes to a head. Or you can just go to the root, which is more, is its own kind of spiritual quest. Presence, on the other hand, is a form of abiding, being with, entering a flow state. We also have to consider the range that we build for ourselves and being able to sit with what is without popping out of it, avoiding it, or adding extra layers onto it that create anxiety. For example, the skill of being able to feel an emotion purely without attaching stories onto it that block us from feeling or have us alternately milking the feeling ad infinitum. Or the skill of being able to feel a body sensation and be present with it instead of going straight into hypochondria and thinking that something is wrong, which trains a lot of fear of the body and has us numbing out. So I think that's, body and psyche or body and soul are actually really connected. And there's a lot of cultural entrainment in the West, I guess we could say, like, I suppose, to medicalize things, to like have a sensation and jump into it being a disease. When actually, if you tune into your soma, if you meditate with your body sensations, if you engage in sensuality and movement and whatnot, there's a lot of communication and signals and whatnot. You can even feel it, like if you just, meditate and tune in and feel like your knees, the front of your shins, right? If you just tune in to a particular place on your body, your brain will start to receive signals and like sensation will appear. And Virgo is connected to small details, right? And then can get very twisted up and anxious about things being wrong, right? So it's like a subtle sensation may not mean that you have an illness. It could just be a sensation that's arising. And so whether we're talking about the body, the soma, or something else, it's like, do we have the capacity to be with the details, or do the details scramble and fry our brains to a place of, overload, can't compute, this sensation or this data is scaring me kind of thing. And so Virgo is actually quite sensitive, right? Like Pisces is as well. We're looking at like spiritual sensitivities or feeling the collective or feeling other people's emotions. Virgo is also extremely sensitive at like a detail level. Or it's like the princess and the pea, that little like small irritant that becomes bigger or something like that. So why I'm sharing all of that is that generally this type of detail, because it's overwhelming, we can create these mechanisms to just shut it out and not think about it and not, just kind of block our sensitivity toward it because we have not been able to interpret the sensitivity. We haven't been able to organize it, which then disconnects us from a bunch of sensory information. And we have less ability to be with ourselves, right? So if you had to just like sit in a room by yourself and do nothing, right? But you had your phone next to you, you might, instead of sitting with yourself, you might prefer the phone as a distraction. And I say that as a metaphor, but it's just like whatever details, whatever subtleties there are to tune into, we can simply be really uncomfortable with them and choose to do something else to not be in contact with that material. So that's kind of what I'm pointing to of like Virgo is busy, but are we busy out there in a way that distracts us, or do we tune into presence to something exquisite, something that is there for us to be in intimate connection with? And then in a deeper spiritual sense, This could also, this lunar cycle, we might see these moments where we can witness the enormity or simplicity of a moment and the way it clashes with our fantasy or preference of what the moment should be to be correct in some way. It's sitting with the grief or gravity that arises inside of that. It's sobriety in the form of being able to accept that we may not like or prefer something, but not spinning out about it, right? It's sobriety in the form of being guided to true, real adjustments to refine, which is a very Virgo thing, rather than being obsessed with a perfectionistic control project. Everyone has their reasons for separating their consciousness from their actual reality. It can be a way to protect vulnerable or precious parts of the psyche from devastation and trauma. Less catastrophically, it also soothes us. You can think of a child spending hours in fantasy books at school instead of facing the annihilating, I said less catastrophically, but maybe not, the annihilating feeling of aloneness, for example, which may be more than the child knows how to bear, right? So fantasy then soothes or provides a rich inner life instead of something barren. So often when we perceive that our material life is failing us, it's not providing some kind of nutrient or needed experience, we just go somewhere else in fantasy. And that can be, I think, in some circumstances, truly adaptive, truly keeps the psyche and the spirit alive. But we do have to know how to reintegrate and come back down to earth. Sometimes when circumstances actually are fruitful for that, and other times the circumstances aren't apparently fruitful yet, but they will be if we connect first. Like if we just descend into matter. The dream beckons us in the form of humble, patient presence with the process and what is, Virgo, the so-called mundane. We have to consider if we want a dreamlike experience to weave into this reality, that we might have to be in the reality to hold it. Getting more skilled at answering the question, what am I avoiding? And then leaning in to meet that is a path not just into reality, but a reality that can hold more true essence than the webs that we create to hover outside of it all. So that's what I have for you about the new moon. The full moon that is coming is going to be a partial eclipse. So I should have said this earlier, but we are in eclipse season, which if you are someone that ritualizes lunations, typically it is said that, if you're trying to manifest something on the new moon, a lot of, a normal new moon can be fruitful for that, especially if you understand the astrology and where it's falling in your chart and all of that, all the better. But with eclipses, there is more of a focus on surrendering to what is happening in nature, like a thread or a pulse of life that's actually moving through you, and not trying to control or force anything, which I think throughout what I've been saying has been a lot of that type of meditation of what if you were present with exactly what life is without trying to make it something else. Right? Like, let's just start there. So that being said, I'm not going to be ritualizing in terms of I'm not going to be trying to manifest anything for this new moon. But I do like to note the new moon. I like to meditate or just be in the energy of it, reflect, ask questions, open the Akashic records, things like that. So I just wanted to name that. I also want to invite you. I am opening a new cohort of my Evolutionary Astrology Intensive. We begin on October 8th. Let me just show you the course page real quick, which is linked in the notes. This is an amazing course. It is something that I've been teaching for years. Basically, I transmit the building blocks to you so that you understand the archetypes, not simply from an academic or bookish perspective, but that you feel the essence of them. You can feel them in your life. You can have your own conversation with them. I teach you the technical skills of how to put things together, how to read a chart as a whole from the perspective of the soul and its ongoing evolution. So it is a program that will help you read charts, your own especially, as well as others. But it's part of a cosmology of understanding the nature of the soul. So this class, all my students have their own unique spiritual journey and transformation with it that I can't predict for you, and that also will be beyond what you can even imagine. I invite you to check out the course page to learn more about it and read student testimonials. And it's by application. So you can fill out an application and then we'll get on a call to discuss the class, your learning goals, right, for astrology, but also what it is in your life that you're seeking to open and touch through astrology. This course, I think what also is worth saying about it here is that it's quite relational, it's dialogue oriented. It is important for me as a teacher to, you can take the class and put yourself at somewhat of a distance and not participate and just absorb the material. And I've had people gain so much from doing that. But I really invite you to be in conversation, to come to the live calls, to share yourself, to share your ideas, because that way I get to know you and I can reflect you back to your chart and what your chart is saying. And I find that, this form of astrology is so much about the soul and the deepest themes of your life that why would we not talk about those things in class? So it's always been important for me to facilitate like a really kind of like exalted, deep learning space where we have conversations that unravel and open these deeper questions and meditations in our lives. And it's always attracted deep, sincere, magical people. Now that I also do the application process and whatnot, it is a very Vestal kind of space. By Vesta, I mean like sacred space. And I would really love to invite you to be part of the next one, to use this as an opportunity to go deeper into not just astrology, but actually the thing that astrology points to, which is an intimacy with cosmos and with yourself and feeling that electric alignment with who you are and understanding the energetics that are operating in your life. That we don't just learn astrology for the academic or mental prowess of it, but that really it's a dialogue that opens up something very spiritually profound in our lives. So if you're wanting to go deeper into just like radically opening up that conversation, really expanding your world out and deep, then this class is for you. So go ahead, check out the course page, read more about it, apply, and I would love to get on a call with you soon about it. I forgot to say at the beginning also to please like this video. It's very helpful for the channel. Subscribe, also very helpful for the channel. And leave a comment. Let me know what resonated with you and how you're doing. Thank you for watching.